Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Science of Emotional Intelligence and Well-Being at Work. I'd like to start by thanking today's sponsor, BrainAware Training. BrainAware Training is the leading developer of brain science-based training programs that solve today's workplace challenges. I'm Jess Thompson, content producer on behalf of ATD, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Britts Andreatta. Dr. Britt Andreatta is an internationally recognized thought leader who uses her background in leadership, neuroscience, psychology, and education to create science-based solutions for today's workplace challenges. Britt is the CEO of BrainAware Training and former CLO for lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning. We also have Claudia Arnett with BrainAware Training, who will be dropping links and helpful resources in the chat. As Regina said, if you would like to participate in today's presentation or ask questions, the chat feature is enabled. Please be sure to select everyone in the drop-down menu. And now I will kick it over to Britt.
Thank you, Jess, and I'm really excited to talk to everyone today about the science of emotional intelligence and well-being at work. I'm very honored to also say that at ATD, just a month ago, I was selected as the Thought Leader of the Year award, which was such a humbling and wonderful experience. So thank you to ATD for acknowledging my thought leadership in this space. And I'm also really excited to work with global companies around the world, helping them solve their workplace challenges. Today, we're going to go through these topics. I'm going to start off talking about well-being. We're going to get into toxic workplaces, how emotional intelligence is how we solve those things. And we're going to dig in a little bit to the brain science of emotional intelligence, looking at self-awareness, self-control, and enhancing relationships. And we're going to give you some strategies you can use to build a more emotionally intelligent organization. So EQ, or emotional intelligence, is what unlocks our potential, both as individuals and then as an organization. And I want to share a little bit about my personal journey to learning about emotional intelligence, because I grew up in a very abusive household, and that was difficult to live through. But how it showed up for me is, as an adult, around my 30th birthday, I started having crippling panic attacks, to the point where I spent 10 years avoiding anything that made me feel trapped. Planes, cars, movie theaters, certainly public speaking. And so I really did a deep dive into healing myself. And that's when I learned about the amazing research on well-being, resilience, and emotional intelligence. And I wanted to study the science of it and try to bring these tools to everyone, because they made a huge difference in my life. And now we see them making a huge difference in our clients' lives as well. So let's start with well-being at work. This is really now the new focus for workplaces, and several of the large global researchers are doing research in this space. So McKinsey and Company have some wonderful resources. My teammate Claudia is going to be popping in the chat all the links, and we also will share with you at the end afterwards a document where they're all in one place. So don't feel like you need to capture all of these, you're going to have them. But I always like to point to the researchers that I look to, or where you can get great data on some of these topics. So McKinsey is one of them. Great Place to Work is another one. They're definitely focusing on employee well-being and why it's such a cornerstone thing to have if you want to be a great place to work. And Gartner also did some deep dives into well-being in their 2023 report on top priorities for HR leaders. And we're now seeing it make the headlines in newspapers. So for example, Forbes had 2 articles. The future of work is employee well-being. And they had a second article on why boards and C-suites should care about employee well-being, because we're seeing a real big focus on that now. The data is super clear. Employee well-being drives a lot of great things at organizations. So here's some data from another study where we can see that performance goes up, retention of key talent goes up, employee productivity goes up, in direct correlation to how much well-being is focused on in that organization. And we can see some other things like intentions to say, engagement numbers, and days lost to absenteeism are also directly impacted in the right directions when you focus on well-being. Now, for many, many years, we've all been thinking about employee engagement, and employee engagement is important, but even Gallup now is turning their focus to looking at well-being as the core of what creates engagement. And from some of their research, they found that employees who strongly agree that their employer cares about their overall well-being, they're 69% less likely to search for a job, 71% less likely to experience a lot of burnout, 36% more likely to be thriving, 5 times more likely to trust the leadership of their organization, and 5 times more likely to advocate for their org as a great place to work. So this shift is important, and Gallup talks about this idea of moving from stressful workplaces to well-being workplaces. And I actually should have the cover. Their new 2024 report just came out last week, and you can download that. But in their research, they're now focusing on employee well-being. And why does it matter? So they have this continuum, and they're doing measurements around the world where people are rating themselves from suffering to struggling to thriving. And we can see some differences globally in terms of where people are thriving the most. They actually have region-specific data in the Global Workplace Report, so I highly encourage you to download that. We also know that well-being is a focus for Deloitte's research, and so they've also been focusing in particularly on the C-suite's role in well-being. And their research is really interesting. They are finding that both employees and executives are putting a high premium on having a job that supports their well-being. So it's not just a wish of employees, it's a wish for everyone at every level of your organization. But interestingly, they found that the C-suite tends to underestimate how much employees are struggling. So C-suite folks or the teal, they think their employees are doing better in terms of physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, and financial well-being than employees are actually doing. And so closing this gap with the executive view is an important thing to do when you're thinking about well-being, because we know that the view from the top creates blinders. Being an executive actually exacerbates privilege. We know that executives are 95% male and 77% white, and their income is 150 to 400 times higher than their average workers. So they're naturally going to have some blinders. And in addition, the longer you hold positions of power, we know from the brain science of power, it actually makes you less empathetic and more likely to project your own experiences onto others, A, and B, see signs of agreement that are not there. So as we're having these conversations about well-being, we need to realize that while executives might be supportive, they have some blind spots. In fact, they feel that their job has a much more positive impact on their lives than their employees do. So these are some data points you can use to kind of educate everyone and start to get people on the same page. We also know that investing in wellness programs is lovely, and many executives are like, yeah, we should do that. But it's important to note that just throwing money at wellness programs is not enough. And I love the research coming out of Oxford. They have this Center for Well-Being, a research center, and one of their researchers talks about that you have to focus on the work, not just the worker. If the workload is heavy, if the work culture is toxic, the organization is understaffed, what can a training program on mindfulness do for employees? So ultimately, well-being is really about addressing toxicity in your workplace and then giving people the tools to make a thriving, healthy workplace. Let's dig in a little bit on toxic workplaces. The American Psychological Association have said that toxic workplaces are really impacting employees in terms of their mental and physical health. 19% of employees label their workplace as toxic, and 22% say that their work environment has harmed their mental health. I did a little deep dive into some of the research on toxic workplaces, and what I found was pretty interesting. One study found that a toxic corporate culture is 10.5 times more powerful than compensation in predicting a company's attrition rate. In addition, 87% of employees say they have been under a toxic manager at some point in their career, and for 30%, they've had this experience with more than one manager. Some additional research by Business Insider, this is a recent headline, they found that nearly a third of American workers say they go to therapy to cope with their toxic boss. I've done that for sure. And sometimes you realize I'm spending more time in therapy than I am in this job, and maybe I should look for a new job, right? But their research additionally found that 74% of workers are feeling anxiety over the weekend when they start thinking about returning to work. In addition, 53% of workers are having nightmares, literal nightmares about their bosses, and 34% are drinking or overeating as a coping mechanism. They went on to do a deep dive into like, how is this impacting specific health issues for workers? We know that it increases anxiety, mental fatigue, creates physical symptoms, depression, decreases engagement, has people start questioning if they've got skill sets or how good they are as a worker. Obviously, this directly impacts productivity and performance. And sadly, people are misdirecting some of that stress on friends or family. So I have a Mentimeter. Claudia's going to share the link in the chat where you can scan this code. But what I'd love to do is have you answer this question. On a scale of from 0 to 10, how prevalent is toxicity in your org at these levels? So do you have a lot of toxicity at the senior executive level, at the kind of the leader level, or your middle manager, supervisor level? So kind of wondering where you see toxicity playing out in your organization. These are anonymous, so feel free to be as honest as you can be. Give you a few more seconds to fill this out. Okay, they're looking pretty even right now. So this is something for you to just kind of think about when you go back into your organization and look at your data points. You know, your engagement surveys will kind of tell you, well, the hot spots are. You kind of know it from the rumor mill. You also can see it in your exit surveys. Where are you losing people, right? Where are the places that you're losing people? But something to pay attention to, because we want to address toxicity. If we don't address toxicity, we can't really get to well-being. Now, I want to bring another report to your attention. The US Surgeon General has felt that well-being at work is so important that they have written an entire report and have a lot of resources on workplace mental health and well-being. So I would encourage you to download this report, because it also has action items and strategies you can use across the organization. It's a very thorough set of tools that they make available. But they created this model which talks about the 5 essentials. And one of them is protection from harm, which includes physical and psychological safety. We also have connection and community, which is really this idea of inclusion and belonging and having trusted relationships and fostering collaboration. Then we have work-life harmony, which is really autonomy over how work gets done, flexible schedules, access to paid leave, and clear boundaries between work and non-work time. Then there's mattering of work, which is providing a living wage, engaging workers in decisions, building a culture of gratitude and recognition. And then we have opportunity for growth, right? And for those of us in the learning profession, this is really where we can shine, offering quality training and mentoring, fostering clear, equitable pathways for career advancement, focusing on feedback. So using the chat, I would love for you to take a minute to share, of these 5 pillars, what are a couple that you think your org probably needs to lean into a little bit more? Like, where's your growth area? And so share that in the chat, maybe why, if you want to identify that. But what are your areas that would be a good place to focus in the coming months? And thank you for all of you to spend your time with us today. I saw that you literally were joining from around the world. I'm always excited to connect with what I call my tribe of learning professionals. I think it's a great opportunity for us to connect with each other and learn new information. So I appreciate your time. All right, we got a lot coming in here. kind of evenly distributed across the 5 pillars. So I'm glad to see you're all finding a place where, oh yeah, we could dig in on this here. So this might be a report and some strategies that you dig into and look at. What's great is they really give you like a whole toolkit of how to fix these things in your organization, so you don't have to start from square one. There's a lot of really great evidence-based practices that the US Surgeon General is sharing. Fantastic. And of course, our group is often out front providing the information and the training and socializing these issues. I now want to dig into emotional intelligence, right? EQ is the emotional quotient, where we think about IQ is the intelligent quotient. And when we think about well-being, the pathway to get to well-being is through emotional intelligence. We can't really get one without the other. So emotional intelligence is the ability to accurately gather emotional data and effectively use it to solve emotional challenges and build effective relationships with others. And all the things that harm well-being or cause toxicity is really a lack of emotional intelligence on the part of the perpetrator, right? So we want our managers to be emotionally intelligent. But when you are on the receiving end of that, you can also use emotional intelligence to kind of help take care of yourself through those difficult challenges. Another report I want to point you toward is by 6 Seconds. They do this state of the heart report. So 2024 is their global report. And they found that global well-being scores have reached an all-time low in 2023, fueled by a 4-year decline in emotional intelligence. We have entered an emotional recession characterized by low well-being and high burnout. And I'm seeing this in all the clients that I'm working with, that we're just seeing that the pandemic burned people out and change fatigue, and we haven't necessarily done the healing work to come back from that yet as individuals and collectively. We see these scores dropping across the board, and 6 Seconds has these categories that they look at: your emotional literacy, your ability to recognize patterns, consequential thinking, navigating emotions, intrinsic motivation, optimism, empathy, and pursuing noble goals. Because they have a global report, they also can rank the regions and give you global data. They're finding that Oceania is doing the best in terms of emotional intelligence and well-being, and Asia is scoring the lowest, and this is how they're ranked. Couple more data points I want to share with you on EQ. EQ is twice as predictive of performance than traditional intelligence or IQ. It accounts for 80 to 90% of the competencies that differentiate top performers. And what's interesting is of people that have had their careers derailed, 75% of that is due to emotional competencies, right? Not being able to manage their emotions at work. We also know that employers are identifying emotional intelligence as a #1 skill. Brandon Hall found that it is the #1 competency for the digital age. McKinsey found that demand for EQ skills are going to grow 6 times by 2030. And World Economic Forum has said, as tech, like artificial intelligence, proliferates, technical skills will need to be supplemented with strong social and collaboration skills, like emotional intelligence. So really leaning into emotional intelligence is going to be the path forward for a lot of wonderful reasons. It's also tied to career development. So when we think about what helps people move forward in their career, emotional intelligence is a skill. So this was supposed to animate, I apologize. 71% of employers value emotional intelligence more than technical skills when evaluating candidates. 75% of people managers use EQ to gauge employees' readiness for promotion. 52% of companies offer senior roles based on candidates' EQ skills. 75% of HR folks say that they value EQ over IQ, and 80% of employees believe that EQ is vital for their career development. So the great news is this is a type of training that everyone sees value in, and so leaning into it can really drive all kinds of great metrics for us to measure. So another quick Minty skill for question for you all. Are you doing emotional intelligence training? So I'd love for you to answer this question. Yes, you're doing it and you built it in-house. Yes, you're doing it, but you've outsourced it. No, but you're planning to launch it in the next 12 months. No, but curious and exploring. and other. So we'll give you a few seconds to fill this in. Okay, looks like a little more than a third of you have something already built in-house. Great. A third of you are exploring. Almost 40% of you are planning to do something. And then we got 13% in other and 12% outsourced. Okay, great. Well, that's a little snapshot so you can kind of see who's on the call and where you're all at. Let me tell you, no matter what, anything you put toward emotional intelligence training will pay off. It has amazing ROI, and I'll actually get to some data points on that later in this presentation. So let's talk about emotional intelligence. I really like to use a metaphor of a key because I really believe that the research shows that it's the key to unlocking all kinds of success. There's different ways to look at emotional intelligence. I like to go with Daniel Goleman's view because he was the original researcher that identified it, and he came up with these 4 quadrants, right? So you've got your personal competence, that's a self-awareness, you know yourself. Then there's your ability to manage yourself, which is self-control. Then there's your relational competence. How aware are you of others and their emotions? And then the management piece, can you manage relationships? Can you build healthy relationships? And then within each of these quadrants, it expands out to a total of 20 competencies. So again, we realize that emotional intelligence can give us a very broad and deep set of skills that can really unlock all kinds of wonderful things. Let's dig a little bit into the brain science of emotional intelligence. It would not be a Britt presentation if we didn't talk about the brain. So we know that emotions influence our actions, that our body has this emotional reaction to life, and that data is used. And the word emotion comes from the Latin verb to move. It's designed to motivate, to move us into action. It influences our thoughts. And the brain is designed to create a balance between instinct and intellect, that we need both, right? We need to have this instinct that might be pretty quickly reactive, and then we need to use our intellect to gauge whether this is the right context, if we're misreading the situation. So using both together. There's a lot of great books out there and articles that dig into the brain science of emotional intelligence. There's also a lot of scholarly studies, so I'd encourage you to dig into those. But we know that emotions have unique biological signatures. So for example, anger triggers increased blood flow to the hands, preparing us for confrontation, while fear redirects blood to our legs, priming us for a hasty escape. Surprise literally widens our eyes, allowing us to have bigger perception and process unexpected events, while happiness and love evokes a parasympathetic response, which fosters calmness and cooperation. So emotions are part of our biological DNA. They help us navigate the world and they help us survive. And so if we think about our evolution as a species, we can see that the brain actually evolved in layers. Scientists call this the triune brain. So at the core level is what's called the reptilian or survival brain. This part of your brain controls core functions like your temperature or your breathing rate. You don't actually think of those things. Your body does it without you paying attention to it, just like your blood pressure and your heart rate. It also is what kicks off the fight, flight, freeze response. So if you've ever been in a situation where you're startled, you can, that response is milliseconds where your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline to help you survive. We share this core brainstem with reptiles, hence why it's called the reptilian brain, because that species also has this. The next layer that grew on was what's known as the limbic or emotional brain. This is where our core emotions live. It's also like our core emotions, think the movie Inside Out, right? Sadness, anger, fear, joy, disgust, the core emotions. This is also where we form social connections, and we share this level of the brain with mammals. So yes, your dog has those core emotions too. Any of you have you see joy on these animals' faces, you see sadness on their faces. So they share these core emotions. I highly recommend going and seeing Inside Out 2 also. I saw it last night. It is amazing. The third layer of the brain is called the neocortex, or the thinking brain. And this is where nuanced emotions live. So from core of joy, then what's like happiness and then maybe pleasure, right? Anxiety to a little bit nervous. So we start to have more nuanced emotions. This is where complex social interactions live. So this is how humans are able to form societies and create laws and live and work cooperatively. This is also where your logical analysis lives and your self-awareness. And what's interesting is we share this layer of the brain with cetaceans. So whales and dolphins are just as complex and have just as complex societies as humans do. It's really fascinating research. So when we think about some core things about our brain, the amygdala is the structure of our brain. It's linked to all the major sensory nerves, and it's constantly scanning our environment for potential threats or danger. And we are all the descendants of people with highly tuned amygdalas who noticed that the grass looked different today than it did yesterday, because this was core to our survival. And when we notice this change, this part of the brain kicks off that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, if you want to get all the flavors, response, which really changes our body and prepares us to survive. Well, when we're in a life-threatening situation, an example you might all be familiar with is if you're driving and all of a sudden somebody swerves into your lane and it's almost an accident, like you feel that flood of reaction, or if you've ever been attacked in any kind of scary situation. Well, what the brain is designed to do in truly life-threatening situations is that it takes our logic and our self-awareness away. It literally takes the thinking brain offline, and it does this to preserve our energy. And also the self-awareness goes away so that if you're injured, you're not really aware of how bad it is. So it protects you from going into shock. This one article says, in moments of intense emotional experiences, the limbic system, the ancient emotional brain, tends to dominate, temporarily silencing the rational mind. And that's really helpful if you're in a life-threatening situation. The problem is it can also happen at work. So typically what we see in terms of these responses at work is physical aggression, criticism, contempt, sarcasm, shaming, teasing. Those are all examples of going into fight mode. And then flight, freeze, fawn is fleeing, withdrawing, defensiveness, excuses, blaming, pleasing. Those are kind of the responses we can have at work. So now when we get into the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, it's really digging in now to things like self-awareness, right? Do you know what your emotions are? Are you able to read your emotions and figure out what's happening to you in any given moment? What's really interesting is Harvard Business Review has an article that found that 95% of us think we're self-aware, but in actuality, only 10 to 15% of us are. All of you are. I'm not worried about that. But what we know is that self-awareness is the starting point for any individual or leader to excel in emotional intelligence. So when we think about, and in our training that we've built around emotional intelligence, we think about knowledge of self, including all of these areas, right? What's your output productivity? What are your emotions? What are your skills and strengths? Is your mindset? Are you fixed or growth? What's your work style? What are your core values? What gives you a sense of purpose? And we know that knowing yourself requires self-reflection. It's something that increases with experience, but over time, it helps you form an accurate self-assessment, meaning how you view yourself aligns with how others view you, and that then boosts your self-confidence. What's really interesting is a couple aspects of our identity are actually sources of workplace conflict. We've found that there's 3 main sources. One is work style. How people work can be a place where they bump heads. Also, our core values. Oftentimes when you look at conflict, people are really upset because someone's violating a core value of theirs, but they haven't necessarily talked about it or articulated it. I'm going to keep the third one a mystery because we'll get to it later in this presentation. But I'd love for you to reflect for a minute for yourselves using the chat. What are you doing in your organization right now around developing self-awareness? What programs are you currently offering that help people explore these aspects of themselves? So you may have a host of programs, but would love to just hear what programs you're currently doing to help people develop self-awareness. Great. Seeing a lot of different options coming through. So a lot of work style assessments. That's awesome. So for all of you, look at the 6 categories here and see which one you're not doing and how you might lean into that in the future, because we want folks to have a pretty holistic sense of themselves. So if you're strong already in a couple of these areas, look at where you maybe can lean in as you further enhance your training on emotional intelligence. So that's self-awareness. I could do a whole lot more on self-awareness, but I want to make sure we get through the broad categories. So I'm going to jump over to self-control. Self-control, I think, is the real biggie, because this is actually where people derail their careers. And it's also the source of a lot of workplace drama and lawsuits and risk mitigation and all of that. So remember, 75% of careers are derailed for reasons, or, of careers that are derailed, 75% are due to emotional competencies. And certainly we can think about the person who cannot control their temper, right? Yells at colleagues, yells at customers. But sexual harassment is also a form of not being able to control your emotions, as is micromanaging the people that report to you. These are all examples of not really being able to control boundaries. And so we like to talk to people about self-control really having these 4 categories. 1, can you manage your emotions? 2, do you know what an amygdala hijack is and can you handle it? Do you know how to self-regulate and can you manage your triggers? So I'm going to do a little bit on all 4. Managing emotions, is kind of what you think it is. Can you identify them? Can you feel them? Can you express them in healthy ways? So, based on the culture you're in, some emotions are really accessible to people, some emotions are not, right? And we may even have gender differences there. So giving people time to explore the emotions wheel and start to identify emotions, and more importantly, like anger is a healthy emotion. You just got to find the right place to express it, right? You shouldn't be suppressing it, but you also shouldn't just let it out whenever it happens. So talking about healthy ways of expression. The second is amygdala hijacks. So remember we talked about this response happening in a life-threatening situation, totally normal and appropriate, but sometimes it happens at work. So an amygdala hijack is when your amygdala kicks off and it hijacks you when you're not in a life-threatening situation. Typically here, our history shapes our pattern. We get into adulthood based on things that have happened to us. But when people cannot manage the amygdala hijack, it tends to lead to regrettable actions because they feel really angry or they feel really upset, and their logic and their self-awareness has gone away. And that's what leads them to say, I'm going to yell at this guy right now. I'm going to slam this thing on the table. And it feels like it's the right action in the moment, but they've lost their logic and their self-awareness. So we actually give people an activity where they spend time reflecting on their hijacks, how it shows up in their body, how can they recognize that they're having one, what is their typical pattern, and then really giving them the strategies that they can use to real time calm their system and get their thinking brain back online, because that's the key to managing those intense emotions when you're hijacked. That leads us to category number 3, which is this idea of being able to self-regulate, which is the key to resilience. So I'm actually going to teach a little piece of our content right now because it's something I want you all to have for yourselves. So this is the research of Dr. Dan Siegel, and he talks about that we all have a window of tolerance, right? And when we're in that window, we feel relaxed and in control. We're able to function effectively, both at work and at home. We're in that ability to just be in good shape. We have a calm state of mind. So when all of that is true, scientists say that our system is regulated, right? We're functioning normally. We're not really experiencing any kind of stress. Well, as we go through our workday, we have ups and downs, right? We've got a meeting, we may have an interaction with our boss, we may have a call with a customer. And as long as we're within that window, these up and down times are known as calm activation, right? We're getting ready for action, our heart rate elevates, we're alert, we're able to think clearly, make decisions, respond effectively. I was in calm activation getting ready for this webinar and leading it. And then afterwards, I'll go into calm deactivation. I'll settle back down, I'll recover as my muscles muscles loosen, heart rate slows, and we're able to feel calm and relaxed. So that's what a great day looks like. But some days, right, if for some reason all my tech was failing or I was having an intense experience, in traffic on my way here, I might be hitting the edge of my window. Things are too intense. This can lead us to two zones of dysregulation. The first zone is known as hyperarousal. This is when we go to that fight-flight reaction. We get fired up. We have increased reactivity with more intense emotions, feelings like anger, anxiety, overwhelm, and a feeling out of control. And then the other zone is known as hypoarousal, which is a freeze reaction where we shut down. So our responsiveness decreases, we withdraw, we have feelings of numbness or exhaustion, depression, disconnection. So now we've become dysregulated, and we want to teach everyone the skills to regulate ourselves. So when we're in hyperarousal, we need to do things to downregulate or cool down the system, things that are going to be calming, soothing, slowing, grounding. So some examples here are deep breathing, writing things down like journaling, shaking and stomping your feet, gentle movement like yoga, rhythmic movement like rocking, dancing, swinging. Time in nature is calming. A warm shower or extreme cold water both work. Soothing music, comforting food, weighted blanket. These are all strategies people can use to down-regulate. We're in hypoarousal. We need to heat up the system, upregulate by doing things that are energizing, stimulating, and connecting. So some examples here are engaging in a sensory stimulation through something you're eating or smells or sounds, listening to more upbeat music, doing more energized movement like walking or dancing. Cold water works on this side too. So cold water is a winner on both sides. Doing something to focus your mind, like playing a game or doing a puzzle. Doing something tactile, hands-on crafts, or talking with trusted colleagues or friends, so connecting with others. So when we think about self-regulation, we want to boost resilience in the workplace by A, teaching people how to do it, but B, giving them access to do this. This is why no one wants to come back to the office. They have these things in their home. They know how to regulate in their home. Even being at home is part of regulation. When we go to the office and we have a cubicle, we might not have access to these things. So I think having regulation rooms or rooms that have the resources for people to regulate themselves is something we all need to be thinking about. Certainly boosting resilience is teaching people how to manage their window of tolerance and self-regulate, and we can get creative about thinking how we do this at work. All right, and again, in our training, we give people tools to assess this for themselves and come up with their action plan. All right, so the third source of workplace conflict, I told you I would reveal it for you, it's our triggers. So what are our triggers? It's the fourth category here that we have, and triggers really are those hot buttons. And this is also going to be related to all four quadrants. Knowing our own triggers allows us to navigate ourselves better, but we can also recognize it in others and use it to form better relationships. So you cannot get to adulthood without triggers. They're your hot buttons. They're basically the brain's database. They're scars of old wounds, right? Things that have happened to you in the past that you bring into your present and your future. Everyone has them. There's no one alive that doesn't have triggers. And they come as a result of living through some kind of traumatic event. We know that 70% of adults have experienced at least one significant trauma during their lifetime. And these traumas can range from military combat and war, living through a natural disaster, being a victim of an accident, having a medical condition, being a victim of a violent crime, including sexual assault or molestation, being a refugee or living through a hostage situation, childhood abuse, domestic abuse, addiction, having a mental health challenge. But sometimes people move into a reaction of shame and blame. And so we want to help people know how to move through these, and understanding their triggers is part of that. So really giving people a tool set to say, hey, this is natural and normal that you have them, but once you understand them, you can put yourself in the driver's seat and not be kind of victimized by this trigger getting hit off and you can't do anything about it. So we like oh, absolutely, racism should be added to that list. Thank you for pointing that out. So thinking about, what are your triggers, anticipating them so they don't surprise you is really important to help people know, oh, these are my triggers, so I should plan for when they're coming, right? Because it's when that button gets pushed when you weren't expecting it that can really throw you off. And then you want to have a plan for them, kind of like your fire drill. We call it a fire drill, and it's much like when firefighters, they literally are always preparing for the next fire. So they get their boots and their pants and everything ready so that when the alarm goes off, they can jump in. They're not searching for their stuff. They're ready to respond quickly. So we want to give all of us the tools to respond quickly to the fire that goes off in our brain and have a plan for getting through them in a way that we won't regret later. The third tool we can give people is that you can heal your triggers. We don't forget what happened to us, but we absolutely can heal some of the damage that was done. And as I mentioned, I spent a decade struggling with this and spent a lot of time healing myself. And so there's a lot of things we can provide for people, right? Therapy, part of a benefits plan. EMDR is a type of therapy that helps unlock trauma in the brain, and even more effective version of that is called the brain spotting technique. Cognitive processing therapy is a style that's really useful for when people are blaming themselves, like they think they had some fault in what happened to them. It's particularly good. So I would point you guys to the work of Dr. van der Kolk here. He wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and he's got some really wonderful YouTube videos that help people understand this and also ways that they can heal their trauma. I know many of you have therapy benefits, but I'd love to see offered more explanations of how we heal through trauma, because that's really at the source of a lot of workplace problems, is our triggers and people not knowing how to manage them. And then finally, we've got everyday maintenance, right? How do we keep ourselves in that window of tolerance? Things like journaling, exercise, using mindfulness practices. These are all tools that we can use to manage how we navigate this world. And so mindfulness in particular shows some really intense benefits. It reduces the reactivity of the amygdala. It literally makes it less reactive. It increases our resilience. It's even known to shift unconscious bias. It decreases inflammation, it slows the aging process, it eases pain and anxiety. So if you want to geek out on the science of this, I highly recommend that you get the book Altered Traits. It's written by Daniel Goleman, the father of emotional intelligence, as well as Richard Davidson, who's doing all the research on the brain science of mindfulness and like what changes. Our brain is literally changed when we engage in mindful practices. So I really encourage you to check that out. All right, a minute here to share in the chat. Maybe lean in here. What's an area you're not really talking about emotional intelligence offerings that you have? Where could you dig in a little bit more and get to some of these skill sets that we can give people? A lot of amygdala hijacks and triggers. Someone mentioned grief recovery. Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of that work with healthcare workers in any particular function where they may see death on a regular basis. Grief is absolutely something we need to help people with. Great. A lot of great comments here. Make sure you're looking at the comments so you can see what other folks are saying as well. Fantastic. And then let's get to the shift now to really awareness of others. As you know yourself, as you know about these things in yourself, it really allows you to see these things in other people. And so all of these are here: empathy, service orientation, organizational acumen, and appreciating diversity. The data on empathy is really strong, right? In fact, DDI ranks empathy as the #1 leadership skill, reporting that leaders who master empathy perform more than 40% higher in coaching, engaging others, and decision making. We also have some new data coming out of McKinsey on empathy. Employees who believe their organizations and especially their managers are empathetic tend to call in sick with stress-related illnesses less often. They report less burnout, better mental health and morale, and a greater intent to stay. People who feel empathized with also tend to innovate more and take creative risks. So empathy is really important. It is a skill set. Another data set for you, Ernst & Young has some great data on empathy at work, and they report these findings. Workers feel that mutual empathy between the company leaders and employees lead to increased efficiency, creativity, job satisfaction, idea sharing, innovation, and company revenue. So empathy, again, is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence. It actually has 4 qualities to it. And I think it's important to teach this because people sometimes confuse sympathy with empathy. So empathy is really about being able to take on another's perspective. How is this person seeing the situation? How is this person feeling in this situation? Being non-judgmental, right? So not being like, well, that's not how I would feel. It's really taking on how they feel. And then using a time when you felt that same way in your own life. So looking at someone who's feeling sadness and not thinking, well, that's not, I wouldn't feel sad in that situation. I have to go, when have I felt sad like that? And use that as a way to create communication of understanding and connection. We can absolutely cultivate empathy in people. Managers can do this by having meetings where the team talks about how others might be feeling, expanding that thinking to other teams in the organization and customers and the community the organization is based out of. And we can do a lot to role model and script how to engage with others from respectful and connected place. One of the things that I think is really valuable is that we look at neurodiversity. And there's a really wonderful playbook that has been created called Autism at Work, because sometimes people perceive folks who are neurodiverse as not being as strong in empathy, and that's really a misnomer. They're actually incredibly empathetic, but with different data sets, meaning they read emotions differently, but actually in many cases more accurately. And there's what's known as the double empathy problem, which is they're not being seen as bringing the strengths that they have. And so you really can do some wonderful diversity inclusion stuff by coming at this angle with empathy and neurodiversity. Speaking of diversity, I know that a lot of DE&I initiatives got some initial boosts during the pandemic, particularly following the murder of George Floyd, but we've also seen a lot of that get shut down. We're in a climate where not a lot of dollars are being put into that right now. I think when we look at emotional intelligence as the pathway around appreciating diversity, empathy, taking on others' perspectives, listening to what they're feeling, caring about people's well-being, that is going to get you the kind of equal and fair and supportive and safe work environments without necessarily calling it a DE&I initiative. So I'd love to see you guys use emotional intelligence as a pathway to get at some of these real critical issues, especially in this time when talking about some of these things has become more difficult. And then, of course, organizational acumen is being able to read the room, right? Read the dynamics of the workplace. Can you see who the power players are? What's not being said in the meeting? So emotional intelligence is the skills of being able to read an organization like you read a person. And that brings us to our 4th category, which is building relationships. You'll see there's a lot of good stuff here. Every single one of these can be a deep dive. Communication, developing others, teams, conflict, influence, change, and leadership. And so really thinking about these as a set of skills that all have kind of brain science woven around them. We have, in our training, we do kind of a holistic skill set. Emotional intelligence is one of the topics, but we have change, we have teams. This becomes a pretty holistic level of training we take all leaders through. And as you think about rolling out any kind of training in your organization, there's some great data out there that gives you the business case. So for those of you who are looking to build or want to strengthen your offerings, I would point you again to the State of the Heart 6-second stuff. They've got some great data on the business case in terms of what your costs are and what will get strengthened if you roll out emotional intelligence training. Harvard Business Review also has some great training points. They've identified that fewer than 20% of companies qualify as emotionally intelligent. 64% of emotionally intelligent companies have a high degree of empowerment and tolerance for risk. You're going to see stronger customer experiences, customer loyalty, customer advocacy. And a company that prioritizes emotional intelligence is 22 times more likely to perform higher than companies that do not. We also know that EQ training pays off. According to some studies, only about a third of people worldwide are emotionally intelligent, but it is a skill that can be taught. So EQ training tends to yield an ROI of 1,000% or more. So for example, a global makeup company rolled out high EQ sales training, and they brought in $2.5 million more dollars. An international hotel chain used an EQ initiative, and it increased their market share by 24%. A national military organization saved $190 million by using EQ to screen their pararescue jumpers. And a major pharmaceutical company saw double-digit profit growth following an increase in team intelligence after rolling out an EQ training. We also know that managers are the key, right? Because managers control at least 90% of your employees' experience of the culture. They directly influence employees' sense of well-being. And so when you roll out EQ training to your managers, you get a payoff. Employees who had managers with high emotional intelligence were 4 times less likely to leave than those with low emotional intelligence. And that, again, is coming out of some of the Gallup research. So let's have one final chat and the reflection, and then we're going to go to your questions. How can you create more buy-in and support for emotional intelligence training in your organization? What are some of the metrics that would matter to your leaders? How can you make this business case? Great. I see tying it to your engagement, looking at attrition numbers, educating some of our leaders on the power of EQ, calculate some of the ROI and share some of the stats. Definitely look at how it impacts profitability and succession planning. Look at where our high turnover is happening under managers who don't have high EQ. Fantastic. Innovation. And then someone said we need to really create a system that incorporates wellness into our ROI. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Well, I threw a lot at you, so I wanted to give you kind of the toolkit to go dig in more and find some additional data points, but I would love to answer any questions that you have. I know Jess has kind of been monitoring any questions that might have come in, but if you have any, type them in the chat, and we'd love to take your questions during this time. And thank you to Claudia for managing the chat. Claudia was in there giving you all the links, so thank you, Claudia. And Jess, yeah, let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Britt. This was fascinating. Love, love, love this. One of the first questions, if we could maybe go back to the topic of toxicity, was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about how you define toxicity in the workplace.
Yeah, so the research shows that toxicity in the workplace is really where people feel that their ability to succeed is being actively undermined, right? So they're not given the resources they need to do their job. We know that toxic bosses are actually like literally undermining people's work product. It can be everything from experiencing like active bullying and harassment to just not like, no matter what you do, you're always blamed, you're not seen fairly. It can be a range of things. But people label it as toxic when it's beyond the level of kind of normal disagreements or whatever, and truly has become a place where no one feels safe. So it's going to have a strong lack of psychological safety.
Thank you. Another question, do you have any advice on how to start this conversation at the senior level?
Yeah, so when I do executive training, I actually have emotional intelligence built into executive training, and I will bring a lot of this data forward in terms of the ROI on it, what what it causes in the organization. If we have some hot spots, I almost always, when I talk with an executive, speak in their language of pain points. So if they care most about profitability, I align everything around those data sets. If they care a lot about engagement or disengagement or attrition, I align my data around that. So I try to find what's the pain point that they care about, and then align the data to what our costs are there and what we could hope to save if we address this issue. And almost always I'm able to show, like, gosh, even if we got a 10% improvement, this thing would pay for itself and then some. So being able to make that business case is important.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you, Britt. And questions are coming in fast. This is a two-part question. What are some ways to help our team connect an EQ training program directly to ROI, employee turnover, or other metrics? And then how do we know what the EQ training program is, or what is making the difference as opposed to something else?
It's a great question. So when we get into trying to prove the value of something, if you, I've gone into organizations where we literally kind of did it scientifically. Like, we took teams that had pretty equal engagement scores, and half of them got the training and half didn't. And then we ran the engagement scores again, and we saw a big increase in the group that got it. And then we went and captured everybody else and they got it again, right? So that everyone eventually had it. So you can do, like, kind of comparing departments and then running pilots like that. Emotional intelligence is one of those where, because it's a pretty holistic skill set, it's going to create great impacts. And so if you kind of do a pre-test and a post-test, like have a self-assessment or an assessment of some kind before you put people through the training and then do it at the end, that gives you the ability to kind of see the difference. But it is important, if you feel like you really have to defend the ROI of something, then don't put that same team through 3 other trainings during that testing period, because then people are going to be like, well, was it the EQ training or was it the change training? You actually won't know the answer to that question.
Thank you. All right. So, Britt, I'm actually going to throw it back to you for any final thoughts that you might have, or any news or research that you'd like to share about BrainAware training, while I collect the last few questions before we wrap up.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. So BrainAware Training is my company. Many of you have kind of seen me in the learning space for a while. I started writing these books on the brain science of things. And pretty soon people started saying, hey, I'd love to get certified in your models. I'd love to roll out training in our organization. So we now have developed BrainAware Training to help you do that. We offer 4 levels of services. We can come in, deliver our trademarked and copyrighted models. We can certify you to do it for your own organization and get your team trained up so you can roll out training. We also license parts of the IP, so you can come in if you're building your own training program, but there's pieces of what we do that you'd like, you can license that IP. And we also do consulting, so we can come in and help you figure out what needs to be rolled out. I have a team of certified trainers. We can do delivery for you. I can work with executives. We have a pretty full suite of services, which means you can kind of pick and choose the pieces you need. And because I have been in your shoes, I've been a learning professional for years, and I'm certified in other people's content. When I went to build my training, I built what I always wanted to buy. So it's 100% customizable. You're really trusted to use the materials you need, because you know your audience better than we do. So I think you'll find that you're given the flexibility and a really robust toolkit to use in your organization.
Yeah. All right. And 1 second, let me get back to my questions here. Thank you so much, Britt. So in the last couple of minutes, what would you suggest to shift the focus on offering programs that focus individual well-being, so meditation, apps, yoga, versus organizational well-being by improving the workplace?
It's a great question. And don't get me wrong, like, those individual things are wonderful, but like, if you've got meditation and exercise and some of that stuff, but you're allowing toxic managers to sit there and undermine their teams, and you're seeing high turnover and attrition and high absenteeism or illnesses on those teams, your employees see that, right? They see that as a disconnect. They see that as a form of hypocrisy. So it's really about walking your talk. If you care about well-being, then it means that you're also addressing managers who are not doing a good job. In addition, you're giving managers the skill sets. A lot of people who are not great managers would be great managers if they got the right training. There's very few people who walk around saying, I want to really harm people today. So it's really about also giving managers training early and often, and not gatekeeping that. I hate it when I see programs that are really good just reserved for high potentials. No, anyone who's managing others needs to get good training, because it's going to really pay off for you across the board.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Britt. And with that, we are out of time. I know that we did not get to everyone's questions today. Please be sure to connect with Britt and BrainAware Training on LinkedIn. I believe that Claudia added those links to the chat. And just to summarize, someone said this was the best part of my day, and I learned so much to take back to my team. So thank you so much to Britt, and thank you again to BrainAware Training for today's webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. We'll get back to people with your questions too.
Thank you.
All right, this was great. This actually concludes today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webcast.td.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts. Thank you so much.